All right, let's talk about some of the issues with research. One of the issues with research is something called a conformity response. This happens when you do like a focus group where you get more than one person together. Um, Sometimes what happens is people like to get along with other people. Not everyone, but most people typically like to get along with other people. And how do you do that? Well, you don't fight about things, okay? People sort of know that if you bring up certain hot button issues in mixed company, it can lead to some issues, right? Whether it's politics or whatever, religion or something like that. So a lot of times people sort of, not everyone, but some people don't like to rock the boat, so to speak. And what that means is that sometimes people may not tell you how they actually feel. They just tell you what they think you want to hear, or they may go along with what other people are saying. So in other words, if you have a group of people and I don't know, there's 10 people and seven of them say I like X, the other three people have more pressure on them to also say that they like X, even if maybe they don't like X at all. So there is what's called a conformity bias or response issue. The way you kind of fix this is by doing interviews because that's more one-on-one. There's less of a sort of group dynamic, group pressure kind of thing, herd pressure. Also, surveys kind of get around this because obviously it's more individualized. If you're observing people, I asked you guys to observe people for your project. Note that humans have bad memories. What does that mean? Sometimes we remember things wrong. It's not like we're trying to be rude or malicious. We just thought something happened one way and it didn't. So it's always good to kind of, videotape or record what you're doing so you can kind of make sure that you're accurately recording information. Um, if you're observing someone, like when you guys are going to observe someone in their project, you want to look for nonverbal cues. That's like facial expressions or like nervous tics or something like that. So like if you're watching someone and they're kind of like shit, like you can kind of they may not say they're uncomfortable, but you can kind of look for other things or say that they're happy or not happy or whatever. Having those can definitely be assist. Um, view the process, not just the result. So if the user doesn't do X, why didn't they do X? There might be reasons for that, for that particular issue. Where am I? Sorry. So many pages. Oh, also for observing, sometimes, especially if it's like something that you did, like if you make a game and you like, where the sword is or whatever, you might want to help people be like, oh, the sword's over here. Here, let me get you over there. Like, don't try to help people. The point of this is you're trying to get accurate data, and in real life, they're not going to have someone there that's going to help them. So you don't want to help them. I know that sounds kind of mean or rude, but it's like, that goes against what we're really trying to accomplish here. Um, so try to, hold back, especially if you're someone who's like kind of defaultly kind of a helper kind of person, kind of resist a little bit, just step back a little bit. It's all for science if that helps you kind of get through it. People are not always truthful. There are sensitive topics that people, may not necessarily for many reasons want to answer correctly because they may feel shame or embarrassment or so asking someone how much money they make in a year, it's like that's kind of some people, if they don't make a lot of money, they may be embarrassed by that, they may not want to say that. Or if you ask someone, if they have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or have they ever are they I don't know why you'd be asking them this, but if they're a virgin or not, or there are certain things usually around sex and money and some other things that people get kind of a little squeamish about, and they're not going to want to they may not be open about these kind of things. So just be aware of that. Think about if you really need that kind of question in your line of questioning, you know, what does it serve really? Um, so if you're doing an interview, positives of interviews, as I said before, is you can always ask follow-up questions, which is always really helpful. Um, gives interviewers tasks to complete. So in other words, I can like say to an interviewer, someone I'm interviewing, here's 4 words, give me, choose your favorite, or, put them in order of greatest to least, kind of, this is kind of a card sorting. And it's like, not that it's impossible to do with an online survey, but it's harder. You know what I mean? Interviews are better for open-ended questions because people kind of just talk and they don't have to write down a bunch of stuff. People don't really like to write. So, if you have a situation where you want people to give a lot of a lot of information, it may help if it's like a focus group and an interview as opposed to doing an online survey or something like that. Obviously, if you're in person, it's easier to view verbal cues and body language and things like that. It's hard, you can't really observe that obviously in a survey or something. Um, you can be more specific about who's in the who you're interviewing. So if someone's not in your user group, you can just not interview that person, that kind of stuff. Um, Negatives about interviews. This is kind of the confirmation bias. Sometimes people will change their behavior, their opinions when they talk to you because they're kind of people pleasers and they just want to sort of say back what they think you want to hear, even if that's not how they really feel. It's harder people just like the logistics of it. It's harder to get people to show up for interviews. So, if you want to, the harder it is to get, the more the more of a the more of a effort people have to do, the smaller the sample size you're going to get. It's easier to get people to do surveys because they're very quick and easy. You can do them in 5 minutes while you're while you're sitting in the bathtub or something like that. Getting people to put on clothes and go downtown and meet for an interview is hard. A lot of these ones, a lot of times, if they're not friends and family, you may have to provide them compensation, like money or whatever. I've been paid to be part of, um, focus groups and things like that. Obviously, for this project, I'm not assuming that you're going to be able to do that, but if you work for a company, there might be a budget for that kind of thing. Um, People are much more less likely to talk about sensitive subjects in person than they are online, where it's more anonymous. So like income, sex, religion, hot button political issues, that kind of stuff. If you really when to use interviews is if you really want more qualitative, subjective information, like why tell me why you like this or you don't like this. It's easy in a survey to be like, I like this, I don't like this. It's harder to get people to give a more detailed follow-up. And so, in this situation, like an interview or a focus group would be better, where people are much more likely to be open about it, kind of give much more detailed feedback. Um, I think I talked about this before. Law of large numbers. You know, the bigger your sample of people, the better. So, the more people you have, the more representative of the group they really are. I kind of talked about that earlier. Sorry, I just jumped around there. I apologize. Um, Shorter is better. Try not to have too many questions. You don't want your interview really lasting more than half an hour to an hour. Most people are going to get tired and their answers are going to get more, you know, curt, maybe less truthful because they just want to get through the interview. So I would say, really kind of at most 30 minutes, maybe less. I've interviewed people more from a entertainment standpoint, and I usually try to make it about 30 minutes. And I feel like, most people's attention spans are much less these days. So it's, just ask the questions you want. Pin them down to the most important questions. Don't ask every question under the sun. Phrasing means like how you say something. Um, open, if you say something that's a more closed question, do you agree, yes or no, X, Y, Z? That's a pretty closed question. There's really only two answers, yes or no. If you give someone more of an open question, they can kind of give more details. What do you think of the following policy? Blah, 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 blah. You're not sort of necessarily for or against it. You're just kind of stating something. Um, the order of the questions can sometimes matter. So thinking about the chronological order of things. Um, I would ask the most important questions that you feel, or at least the questions that you feel are the most important first. The reason why is, like I said, people kind of get more tired as the interview goes on. So I feel like they're more susceptible to kind of give you more less thought through answers and just kind of like, yeah, 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 I love that. Great, great, let's go, kind of situation. Let's talk about surveys. I'll show you guys how you can make a survey in the next video through Google. I'm just going to use Google Forms, but you can use other services like or SurveyMonkey or something like that. A survey is just a bunch of questions. These can be, multiple choice questions or true false type questions. You could even ask like very basic, fill in a blank kind of, or, have a short response type question. Students are not, participants are anonymous, or you could give it in person on a piece of paper. Although I feel like in 2025, it's just easier to, make it a online link. Positives of the survey would be that people, when they're anonymous, are much more likely to be honest, especially on more sensitive topics. So that is helpful. Everyone gets the exact same questions, so there's no variables in the way that you say things or the phrasing of anything. So you're more likely to get data that's kind of more truer. There's less variables that could mess up the data. Surveys are usually cheaper. I'll show you how you can set up a survey for free if you want one, or, obviously if you have to, if you're doing a focus group, you got to pay for or you don't have to pay, but you need a moderator, which is you got to get people to show up, and that's usually hard unless you give them money or some sort of incentive, like food or something like that. Surveys are typically easier to organize because people don't have to show up. They don't, there's no physical location, there's no Zoom meeting. You just kind of give it to them. Negatives of survey is that you really can't ask any follow-up questions. So if someone says something interesting, because you're not there with them, you can't really have them expand on that. It's really up to the user to sort of share or not share. Um, one issue with surveys is it's really all based on your question. So if someone doesn't really understand the question, they can't ask you. And so that might influence how they respond. So be careful with your languages, your phrasing of things. If your survey is too long, people might just give up since you're not there and there's no moderator, there's no one sort of there kind of pushing them to finish it. You know what I mean? Kind of encouraging them to finish it, and that can be an issue. When should you use surveys is when you want to have a really large sample size. The more people, the better. It's good for demographic information. It was just like, what is their age? What is their name? What is their income level? Something like that. So, this is what an online survey might look like. You can kind of have people give, you know, particular subset answers, scale of 1 to 10 type situation. We talked about card sorting. Card sorting is when you set a group of or set of topics and ideas on cards. Um, the point of card sorting is they allow people to organize information really well. So people can kind of put related ideas or topics together. This is really helpful when you're trying to figure out like, how people think about the relationship between things. So informational structure, like, if I'm looking for a book, am I going to be searching by author or, title of the book or, things like that. So it's like, how do people really find the information they want? Card sorting is really good at that. Positive of card sorting is it can make projects with lots of information, like a web, like a commerce website or like much more manageable. Like the reason what I'm saying is like Walmart sells a lot of things, right? So it's like if I'm looking for, I don't know, a bicycle, right? Where would that be under Walmart's page? Is it going to be under toys? Is it going to be under, I don't know, transportation goods or something? I don't know. You can learn about the priorities of your audience. You can ask them like what's the most important thing to them. You can discover grouping habits that maybe you weren't really aware of and just see how people kind of organize data. Negative of card sorting is it's kind of a pain to set up. Either it's physical or even in my sort of digital situation that I showed you earlier, it's like you would have to set up something where people can move around cards. So you're probably going to have to, give them away. It just takes time to set up, like setting up a game. The information is much more qualitative. It's really hard to do statistics on it, but you can kind of get a general sense. Um, Cards are useful for the users. So in other words, like, it's specific to the user and, every user is a little different. But, when to use card sorting, when you want to know what content or features you want to include. So, in my thing about the Wild West, it's like, what do people want to do in a Wild West world? Do they want to be able to rope a steer? Do they want to be able to jump on a horse and, catch a bank robber or whatever it is, So this is how, card sorting typically looks physically. I showed you kind of like a digital way you could do it using like Figma or something like that. All right, so that is ways of researching. Okay. And you're not going to be doing all of this for your project, just to let you know. But, I just want you guys to start thinking about how would you, get information? Who wants, whatever world you're creating, who wants it? Why do they want it? What's important to them? That kind of stuff. So you should think about, are you going to do interviews? Are you going to do surveys? Maybe if you have time, set up a card sorting. If this was a longer UX class, I would require that. But I'm not in here. I'm going to kind of leave it up to you. But I want you to think about what do you want to do in terms of data. Okay.